Tea began with a trip that was supposed to last 3 days, Monday through Wednesday. Melissa was heading out for a regional PR summit in Austin, a pretty routine thing for her job. She'd done these kinds of events before, panel discussions, networking brunches, late dinners with clients. I'd never had a reason to doubt her. Not once. That Sunday night, she was packing light, mostly sleek professional outfits and her favorite navy blue blazer. She wore a calm smile, humming softly while folding clothes with precision. I remember thinking how effortless she made it look, this balance between ambition and beauty. Before she zipped up her suitcase, she looked at me and asked, "You gonna miss me?" I laughed, pulled her in, kissed her forehead. "Yeah, course I will." I dropped her off at the airport Monday morning before sunrise. Her flight was early, her mood upbeat. She talked the whole ride about one of the keynote speakers she was excited to hear and how her company was considering launching a new brand initiative. I was genuinely happy for her. She was thriving. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 5. She didn't come home until late Saturday night. At first, she texted on Wednesday to say the summit had been extended with some additional workshops and partner meetings, nothing too unusual, just corporate spontaneity. Then she told me on Thursday that she'd be staying another day to meet with a potential client from Denver. Friday, she went silent most of the day, then sent a short message after 10 p.m., flight delayed. "I'll be home tomorrow. Love you." No explanation. No details. Just love you. By the time Saturday rolled around, I'd run through a dozen rationalizations. Delays, reschedules, client emergencies. But none of it felt solid. I wasn't usually the suspicious type, but something about the silence unsettled me. She finally walked through the front door a little after 9 p.m. I was standing in the hallway, barefoot on the hardwood floor, sipping a beer I didn't even want. Her suitcase thunked against the step as she pulled it up with one hand. She gave me a tired smile, too tired. Like she was putting on a face she hadn't rehearsed enough. Her hair was styled differently. Soft waves instead of the usual straight and sleek look she favored for work. Her makeup was faint, but her eyeshadow shimmered faintly under the porch light. The scent that drifted off her wasn't her signature vanilla peony perfume. It was something muskier. Male? Then I noticed her dress. A white summer dress I had never seen before. Slightly wrinkled like it had been stuffed in a bag too long. And at the hem just above the knee, there was a smudge. A pinkish red smudge that looked too vivid for wine and too strategic to be an accident. I didn't say anything at first. Just stared. She noticed me staring, followed my eyes, and then gave the most casual explanation I've ever heard. "Oh yeah, that? Probably just some lipstick I brushed against in the hotel laundry," she said with a nervous little laugh. "I was wearing this dress to dinner one night. Should have stuck to the blazer, I guess." Her voice was light. Too light. The kind of light you put on when you're trying too hard not to seem heavy. She waved a hand through the air like she was swatting away a gnat. "Oh, and sorry about the schedule changes. Things just got so busy and disorganized. Honestly, it was a nightmare. People were coming and going, double bookings everywhere. We even lost our meeting room one night and ended up working in the lobby. It was ridiculous." She looked me straight in the eye when she said it, like she was daring me to question her. But there was a flash of something right before the smile. Like a crack in a porcelain mask. I gave a half-hearted nod. "That's rough." She kissed me on the cheek, tossed her suitcase by the stairs, and headed straight for the shower. I stood in the living room, staring at her bag. The zipper was slightly open, and I could see something black with lace peeking through the mesh of the interior compartment. Not that there was anything wrong with her bringing lingerie. We were married, after all. But it felt misaligned. Like someone dressing for the wrong part in the wrong play. I wanted to believe her. I really did. We'd been married for 6 years, lived in this house for almost 5. Built a life full of Sunday brunches, family barbecues, and mutual bank accounts. We had routines, inside jokes, matching mugs, a calendar with color-coded reminders. That kind of life doesn't just unravel in a week, does it? But still, something gnawed at me. That night, after her shower, she came to bed like nothing had happened. Wore a t-shirt I didn't recognize. Said she was too tired to talk. Turned her back to me and was asleep, maybe pretending, before I even turned off the light. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of her breath. Trying to count how many times her stories didn't quite add up. The laundry excuse. The last-minute meeting. The silence on Friday. That was the moment it changed. That was the moment I stopped believing her. I didn't say anything, not that night, not the next day. I kept the peace. Asked her how the summit went, nodded politely at her vague answers, even complimented her presentation when she showed me a grainy photo from the event. But my trust? That part didn't come back. A week later, I found that white summer dress tucked deep in the back of her closet. I pulled it out like it was radioactive. That reddish smudge hadn't faded. I held it up to the light, turning it gently like maybe the right angle would reveal a truth she hadn't told me. Instead, all I saw was a piece of fabric that belonged to a story I hadn't been invited to hear. And that was the beginning. After that night, things didn't fall apart all at once. They unraveled slowly, quietly, the way a rope frays at the edges before it snaps. At first, it was little things, subtle changes in her habits that would have seemed normal if they hadn't come all at once. Her wardrobe shifted practically overnight. Melissa had always leaned towards soft sweaters and well-worn jeans around the house, comfortable and practical. But suddenly, her casual wear looked curated, sleek black leggings, fitted tops, silk blouses on a Tuesday morning. Even her shoes changed. Out went the worn flats, in came ankle boots with heels. Then came the phone. It used to live on the kitchen counter or left charging in the living room. Now it was permanently glued to her hand at the dinner table, in bed, even in the bathroom. She started taking it into the shower, tucking it inside a towel on the sink. The first time I noticed that, I said, "That thing gonna melt in the steam?" half joking. She laughed too loud. "It's waterproof," she said quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. Maybe she had. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but her behavior kept feeding the suspicion. Her messages now popped up without previews, just vague notifications like new message or someone sent a photo. She'd glance at the screen, tilt it away from me, and type quickly with both thumbs, like whatever she was saying needed to be said fast and privately. Meals became hit or miss. She started skipping breakfast with me, claiming she had early Zoom calls. Lunches turned into solo outings, just running errands or meeting a client, which I tried not to question, but the timings never lined up. One day, she said she was grabbing lunch with a coworker, but I saw the same coworker post a tagged photo on Instagram eating sushi across town at a completely different time. Melissa wasn't in the picture. When I asked about it later, she barely blinked. "Oh, that must have been from a different day," she said. "We had sushi twice that week." "Twice?" "We barely got sushi once a month together." Dinners disappeared next. She started coming home later and later, blaming urgent last-minute meetings or client feedback sessions. I'd make dinner and wait. Sometimes she showed up with fast food wrappers in her bag, claiming she already ate. Other times she'd come home, pour herself a glass of wine, and eat crackers standing at the counter like she couldn't be bothered. Conversation dried up. She stopped asking about my day, my projects, my friends. Stopped laughing at my dumb jokes. She used to light up when I came home, hug me at the door, make sarcastic comments about my beat-up messenger bag. Now she barely looked up from her phone. Physical in asterisk Macy faded too, first in frequency, then in feeling. It wasn't just the lack of S*X, it was the way she touched me like checking a box. I'd reach for her in bed and she'd flinch slightly, then say she was tired, her head already on the pillow, the back of her body turned to me. She stopped cuddling. Stopped kissing with meaning. She said she was stressed, that work was overwhelming. I told myself to be patient. But it wasn't stress. It was something else. One night, I suggested we go away for the weekend, just the two of us, like we used to. She smiled tightly, sipped her wine, and said, "I don't think I have the bandwidth for that right now." Bandwidth? We weren't tech consultants. We were married. I didn't argue. I just nodded and stared into my glass, feeling like I'd been unplugged from something I couldn't name. The real turning point came a few weeks later. It was a rainy Wednesday night, the kind where the sky turns slate gray by late afternoon. We were both home early for once. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop, supposedly working. I sat across from her, pretending to read, but mostly watching her. After an hour of silence, she looked up, cleared her throat, and said, "I've been thinking." "About us," she said carefully, her fingers still resting on the keyboard. "I think maybe we should take a break. Just for a couple of months." I blinked. "A break?" "Yeah," she said, as if we were discussing paint samples. "I think we both need some space. A reset. It's not a divorce or anything. Just time to figure ourselves out. Ourselves. Like we were strangers sharing an Uber instead of a home." I asked her what that would look like. She said she didn't know. Maybe one of us could stay with a friend for a while. Maybe we could check in once a week. Therapists say space can help sometimes, she added, like that made it scientific. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just sat there and nodded, because what do you say to someone who's already decided to leave without leaving? That night, she went upstairs and closed the bedroom door without saying goodnight. I didn't sleep. Instead, I walked the length of our living room for hours, counting the things that no longer made sense. The unanswered texts. The perfume she stopped wearing around me but wore on random weeknights. The new lingerie I never saw her wear. The smile that no longer touched her eyes. Back then, I still told myself she was just lost. Maybe disillusioned. I believed the temporary separation talk. Told myself she'd come back. Now, looking back, I see it for what it was, a soft exit. She was already halfway out the door. I just hadn't noticed how wide it was open. There's only so much ambiguity a person can live with before the need for certainty becomes unbearable. For me, it came in the form of silence. Not hers, mine. I stopped asking questions. Stopped pushing for explanations. I became quiet, measured. I watched. I waited. And in that waiting, I realized something critical. I didn't believe her anymore. Not a single word. A month into our temporary separation, Melissa still lived under our roof. We'd gone from sharing everything to existing in parallel. Two ghosts under the same ceiling. She worked from home but always behind a locked office door. Her laptop was never left unattended, her phone never out of reach. She had a new passcode. Her smartwatch never came off. She moved differently now, secretive, cautious, alert. Not the kind of alert you show when you're afraid of being caught. No, this was worse. It was the calm of someone who no longer cares if they are. I should have said something. Should have confronted her. But I didn't. Something held me back, maybe pride, maybe fear. Maybe it was the part of me that wanted to be wrong. Instead, I made a decision. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I reached out to a guy named Dennis, an old high school friend who had become a private investigator. He wasn't the trenchcoat, cigarette type. He was professional, discreet, and deadly efficient. When I explained the situation, he didn't judge. Just nodded and said, "I'll find out what you need to know." He started that week. What came back changed everything. The first thing he handed me was a timeline, dates, locations, confirmations. Melissa hadn't just extended her business trip. She'd never attended the second half of the summit in Austin. She checked out of the hotel on the third day, the same day she texted me that the event was being extended. She spent the remaining 2 nights at a luxury hotel downtown, booked under her name, but the reservation was for 2. Dennis included itemized expenses. 2 glasses of wine at dinner, 2 entrees, room service charges for breakfast, and a bottle of wine. One charge stood out, a spa treatment listed under Couples Serenity Package. He also included photos. I braced myself before looking. I didn't know what I expected, some blurry *TS, maybe a silhouette, a long-distance capture of a hug. But no. These were crisp, clear, and damning. In one photo, she sat at a window table of a riverfront restaurant, laughing, her hand interlaced with a man's. His face was partially turned, but there was no mistaking the familiarity between them. His palm rested lightly on her thigh, like it belonged there. In another, they stood outside a bookstore, sharing a coffee. She leaned into him as he whispered something into her ear. She smiled in that way she hadn't smiled at me in months. I didn't recognize him at first. But Dennis did his homework. The man was a regional director for a firm Melissa's company had recently partnered with. His name was Aaron Blake. Single. Mid-40s. Lives out of state but travels frequently. They'd met 8 months earlier at a client onboarding session. There were more photos at a wine bar, checking into a hotel, walking through the park. Normal things. Casual. An asterisk mate. But it was the timestamps that sealed it. These weren't isolated incidents. The affair had been going on for at least 6 months. Every time she said she was out late with clients, she was with him. Every canceled dinner, every last-minute meeting, every weekend trip him. They weren't even hiding it. At least not from the world. Just from me. The depth of her betrayal hit me in waves. At first, it was numbness. A kind of emotional paralysis. Then came the shaking, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads to your fingers. I sat in the living room. Photos spread out on the coffee table. Watching the life I thought I had disintegrate before my eyes. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen her laugh like that. The last time she touched me the way she touched him. The last time she looked at me and saw a husband, not a placeholder. Dennis sat quietly across from me, his expression unreadable. "I can get more," he said softly. "If you want details." I shook my head. "No, this is enough." It was more than enough. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't say a word. Instead, I cleaned the house, vacuumed the living room, took the trash out, cooked dinner for myself. I sat at the dining table and ate slowly, deliberately, like I was in control of something. Anything. Melissa came home around 9:30 p.m., her hair damp, wearing a new blouse I hadn't seen before. She looked startled when she saw me sitting there, forced to smile. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys in the bowl. "Didn't expect you to be up." "Yeah," I replied, setting my fork down. "Wasn't tired." She hesitated. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I said, and I meant it. She stood there for a second, uncertain, then wandered off into the kitchen. I heard her open the fridge, pour herself a drink, then retreat upstairs. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I knew everything now. What surprised me most wasn't the affair. It was the planning, the coordination, the double life. She'd managed to build a second relationship right under my nose. She didn't just cheat. She lived it, owned it, nurtured it. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not the S*X, the sincerity. She was in love with him, or at least she wanted to be. And I was just the husband, the man who paid the mortgage, fixed the leaky sink, picked up the groceries. The man she once loved but no longer needed. For weeks, I had been wondering if it was all in my head, if I was being paranoid, insecure, jealous. But now I knew. The evidence sat in my lap. Tangible, undeniable. And still I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just sat there. Because now I had the truth. And with the truth came clarity. Some people assume betrayal is the climax, that once you uncover the truth, the pain peaks and then slowly fades. But they're wrong. The worst part isn't discovering the affair. It's what comes next. It's the pretending. The endless, suffocating days where you still live under the same roof, play the same roles, but everything behind your eyes is different. She didn't know I knew, and I wasn't ready for her to know that I did. So I waited. It wasn't out of cowardice. It was strategy. The emotional part of me wanted to shout, slam pictures down in front of her, demand answers. But the rational part, the part that had been sharpened by every silent meal, every shift in her gaze, held me back. I wanted control, not revenge, not theatrics, just something that belonged to me, that couldn't be rewritten or denied. And then the gala came. Melissa had insisted we go. It was a charity event in Charleston, an upscale, high-visibility affair sponsored by the city's Cultural Development Board. I was presenting a project I'd poured my soul into, a new housing initiative for homeless veterans. It was my first major recognition since starting my own architecture firm, and Melissa had RSVP'd as if we were still the golden couple. "I already confirmed," she told me casually one evening. "It'll be good for us to show up together. People will expect it." People. The ever-present audience. She spent 2 hours getting ready the night of the gala. When she walked down the stairs in a dark green silk gown, I felt that familiar ache in my chest. The kind of ache that came from remembering a version of her that still felt real to me. The version who used to whisper to me during slow songs, who once gave up a client dinner to binge bad Netflix and eat cereal in bed. Now she looked like a statue. Beautiful, icy, untouchable. We barely spoke on the drive there. She scrolled her phone the whole time, fingers tapping out messages I didn't bother asking about. I already knew. The venue was stunning. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, polished floors that reflected back a version of yourself you barely recognized. Melissa slipped into mingling mode instantly, floating from table to table with that PR polish she wore like a second skin. She introduced me a few times, laughed at a few jokes, then drifted away. I stood near the bar for most of the night, sipping ginger ale, reviewing my presentation notes, and waiting for my name to be called. Then it happened. Just as I stepped onto the small stage to present my project, a carefully designed blueprint for a sustainable, community-centered housing complex, Melissa's voice rang out from the front table, loud enough to cut through the polite applause. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's hope the roof doesn't leak this time." A few chuckles floated through the crowd, half-hearted, nervous. She laughed too, but there was an edge to it, sharp and performative. My throat tightened. I kept going, kept clicking through slides, but my voice lost warmth. I could feel the room shift, energy draining out like a leak in a tire. She'd undercut me, and she knew it. Afterward, I thanked the committee and stepped off the stage, heart pounding with something that wasn't just embarrassment. It was fury, disbelief, and something deeper. Finality. I returned to our table, jaw clenched, ready to say something. But before I could, a tall man with silver hair and a navy suit intercepted me. "You're Tyler, right?" he said, extending a hand. That was outstanding. Truly. I blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm Daniel Lathrop," he added. "Lathrop Capital. I've been looking for sustainable design partners for a new housing investment in the Southeast. I think you and I need to talk." Melissa turned, recognition flashing across her face. She stood abruptly, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning his badge. When he walked away, she sat down slowly, her expression unreadable. "Was that who I think it was?" she asked. I nodded. He liked the presentation. She didn't respond, just stared at her wine glass like it held answers. That was the moment the tide shifted. For the first time in months, I saw her crack. Not cry. Not apologize. But falter. Her certainty wavered, just enough for me to see through the armor. The rest of the evening blurred. We stayed long enough to be polite, then left without speaking. In the car, the silence was heavier than ever. She didn't scroll her phone. Didn't fake a smile. Just stared out the window while Charleston passed by in streaks of gold and shadow. When we got home, she went straight upstairs. I didn't follow. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, the echo of her voice from the gala still ringing in my ears. "Let's hope the roof doesn't leak this time." She'd mocked me. Publicly. Casually. Like I was some relic from a life she'd already deleted. But it didn't break me. If anything, it centered me. That night, for the first time since I'd seen the photos, I felt calm. Not resigned, focused. I wasn't going to shout or beg or collapse. I wasn't going to compete with her lies, her silences, or her designer guilt. I was going to get out. On my terms. The next morning, the house was unusually still. Melissa left early, claiming she had a strategy session downtown. I didn't ask questions. I just watched her walk out the door in heels too tall for comfort and lipstick that didn't match the color of the woman I used to know. When the door clicked shut, I locked it behind her, not out of spite, but out of instinct. That was the moment I knew I was done trying to fix anything. The weight of trying to salvage a relationship that had already capsized was exhausting. Now, I just wanted clarity. Closure. A clean break. I called a lawyer. Her name was Janine Robbins. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm voice. A colleague had recommended her for being ruthlessly efficient and emotionally grounded. I told her everything, every suspicious trip, every fated touch, every lie spun with a smile. When I handed over the folder Dennis had given me, the photographs, the receipts, the printed messages, she didn't flinch. Just flipped through each page, nodding slowly. "This is solid," she said. "Very solid. Financials." That's when the second shoe dropped. Melissa had been managing our finances for the last couple of years. Not because I couldn't, she had simply volunteered. It made sense at the time. She was better at budgeting, more disciplined with monthly bills. But when I sat down that morning to comb through our joint accounts, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The transfers. Small ones at first, $200 here, $500 there. Then larger amounts, $2,000 wired to a second checking account I'd never seen. She'd labeled them as savings diversions or emergency funds. But they weren't going to any account with my name attached. She was building her escape route. I pulled records, downloaded statements, compiled spreadsheets. The pattern was clear. She'd been quietly moving money for months. At least $17,000 was now sitting in a separate account that didn't trace back to us. When I showed Janine the numbers, she didn't blink. "This strengthens your case," she said. "We'll include this in the financial disclosure. If she doesn't report it, she's perjuring herself. Judges don't like that." It should have made me angry. But instead, I felt detached. Like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The pain was there, just muted. Like a dull ache that never quite leaves, no matter how many distractions you pile on top. So I focused on the steps. I made backups of everything, legal documents, emails, photos. I changed the passwords on my devices, unlinked our shared calendars, rerouted important mail to a P.O. box I'd opened a few days prior. I didn't make a scene. That was the key. Let her think everything was still moving on the same broken track. I played the part, smiled politely when she made small talk, nodded through her one-sided updates about work, even feigned interest when she mentioned a new marketing campaign. But every night, I went to the gym instead of sitting on the couch with her. I walked longer routes along the shore, letting the wind clear my head. Sometimes I'd sit alone in our parked car and just breathe, staring at the empty passenger seat like it might talk back. At home, I began quietly removing myself. I started packing up my office little by little. Books disappeared from the shelves. Old photos vanished from frames. I stored them in boxes labeled donations and stacked them neatly in the garage where she wouldn't notice. One Saturday, I took my wedding ring off while washing dishes and never put it back on. She didn't mention it. One night, I passed her in the hallway. She looked tired, maybe hungover, maybe just stretched thin by the weight of her own deception. She opened her mouth like she might say something, then stopped. I kept walking. That was the hardest part, honestly, not the betrayal, but the way she didn't even try to pretend anymore. There was no remorse. No effort to apologize. Just avoidance. She wasn't torn between two worlds. She had already chosen. She just hadn't found the nerve to tell me yet. But I had found the nerve to walk away. Every day, I became less angry and more resolved. I used to dream about confronting her, about shouting, demanding to know why. But what would that change? She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a while, and I was just too in love with the memory to see it. So I stopped fighting for the memory. I focused on facts. Evidence. Peace. I met with Janine twice more that month. She drew up a plan, a clean filing, preemptive asset protections, and a strategy to prevent any interference with my business. Melissa had no legal claim to my architectural firm, but we took no chances. Every client contract was re-reviewed, every document notarized. I told no one at first. Not my parents, not my friends. It wasn't shame. It was self-preservation. I didn't want advice. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted space to feel everything, to make decisions from clarity, not chaos. The house began to feel different, quieter, yes, but also calmer. Like something toxic had been drained from the air. I lit candles, opened windows, played old music while cleaning out drawers we hadn't touched in years. It felt like I was reclaiming something. Melissa still hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had and chose not to mention it. Either way, the silence between us deepened. It wasn't awkward, it was clinical. We passed like coworkers in a cubicle maze. Shared the same fridge, but never the same table. Then one night, I came home to find her crying in the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. She didn't know I was home yet. She sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking, a tissue clutched in one hand. Her phone was beside her, face down. For a moment, I considered walking in, asking what was wrong. Maybe there was still a part of me that wanted her to look up and say, I made a mistake. But she didn't. She just sat there, curled into herself like a stranger in my house. I turned away, walked back downstairs, poured a glass of water, sat in the dark kitchen and stared at nothing. If the tears were about him, I didn't care. If they were about me, they were too late. This wasn't about retribution anymore. This wasn't about making her hurt. I didn't want to win anything. I just wanted to be free. And I was almost there. Filing the divorce papers felt less like the beginning of an ending and more like finally closing a door I'd been holding open for too long. Janine filed them on a Thursday morning. By the afternoon, Melissa was served at her office. I didn't want to be there for the fallout. Her reaction came in waves, first confusion, then anger. She came home that night already on the offensive. You blindsided me, she said, throwing the papers on the kitchen table. I stayed calm. I didn't blindside you. I just stopped pretending. She accused me of being controlling, cold, emotionally distant. She claimed the separation had been her idea to help us reconnect, not split us apart. When that didn't sway me, she turned to guilt. How could I do this after everything we built? After all the years? But I didn't budge. The facts were on my side. The photos, the financial discrepancies, the evidence of her affair, all laid out, cataloged, and presented in mediation. She tried to spin her narrative, painting herself as lost and misunderstood. But the truth was undeniable. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of her own exit. The court ruling came swiftly. She walked away without a claim to my firm, no share of the house, no alimony. The judge cited infidelity and concealment of funds as clear violations of trust. She didn't cry in court. She didn't even look at me. But as she packed the last of her things, her silence was louder than any apology. 6 months later, I stood in front of a nearly finished home, the first structure built under the veteran housing initiative I had once presented at that charity gala. The sun was just rising over Denver, where I had since relocated to open a second office. The air felt different there. Lighter. I spent my mornings with coffee on a balcony overlooking the Rockies, my afternoons buried in blueprints, and my evenings walking unfamiliar streets with nothing but quiet in my ears. There were no dramatic reinventions. I didn't leap into a rebound or flood my schedule with distractions. Instead, I rediscovered the simplicity I had once forgotten, reading books I never had time for, dusting off my old camera, hiking trails just for the stillness. People asked me if I'd ever date again. I didn't have an answer. Love wasn't a puzzle I was rushing to solve. For now, peace was enough. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to notice me. I wasn't measuring my worth by what I could fix or who I could keep. I was just living. And for the first time, that was more than enough.